I know that God gave you early on a message for our nation. And what was it that spearheaded you into being on national television, and what took place in that?
Well, my first adventure, I named it Bible Revival Hour. I was surprised that name wasn't already taken. Bible Revival Hour. Because I felt like what America needed was a revival of the Bible. And then I did radio on several 50,000 and 100,000 watt stations in places where that we could cover the nation.
You were on right in the same time frame as C.M. Ward. I remember that.
Yes, C.M. Ward and I were contemporaries. He's gone to be with the Lord, and I'm right behind him. But you know, that was a good experience. And I had to learn a lot. And I'll never forget one thing. I had my own tape recorder. And your two older sisters, Jan and Gail, they loved to sing the song, I'm a Little Teapot. And they got on my recorder and they sung that, and it had like 4 different bars on it. And when I did my radio program and I sent it to the radio station, well, on the radio they didn't break it down into 4 different areas. And so it came out them singing, I'm a little teapot behind my preaching. Oh, I tell you, I had to laugh about that. But since then I've got both of them little teapots to remind them they were on a big radio station singing I'm a Little Teapot. Of course, they've sung a lot of gospel songs and what have you. But then Revival Fires was born. And that was a name that God gave me from the 2nd chapter of Acts, when it says that when the church was started, that we're all together, one accord in one place, and suddenly there came a sound from heaven, as of a rushing mighty wind, filled all the place where they were sitting. There appeared in them cloven tongues like as of fire. And I thought the church was started in the midst of a Holy Ghost fire.
Yes.
And this is what America needs today. Most churches are not really sold out for God. They're not on fire. The people are not. Not the building, but the people. And that's when the Lord said, I want you to call your ministry Revival Fires, because
Amen.
The church needs to be revived. It needs to be set on fire. It needs the flames of revival and of the Holy Spirit rekindled in the church. And so thank the Lord I was able to use that name, because God gave it to me to use, and I think God has used it in a marvelous way, because each one of you realize today that probably your greatest need is to have your prayer life on fire,
Yes.
your Bible reading on fire, your
Yes.
soul winning on fire, and you're living for God on fire, to where the people don't have to ask you, are you saved?
That's right.
They'll know by the way you're living. They'll know by the way you're talking that you are on fire. And one thing about fire, when you're on fire, wherever you go, the fire goes.
That's right.
And the fire spreads.
That's right.
And so God has used that, and I was the first one, Tim, to introduce that.
Right.
Even though that the Bible taught that in the beginning the church started in the midst of fire that fell from heaven.
Yes.
Because I want to see more of the fire power of God in our churches, in our revivals, in people's lives, and I feel like God is able to do that.
Yes, you know, one thing, Dad, where God used you mightily was in the tent revivals. God used you to set revival fires across America in a tent that seated 2,000 people. Dad would carry water baptismal robes with him when people would get saved, and masses, hundreds and thousands of people across America would get saved and set on fire for God in those tent revivals, as well as churches, hundreds of churches that were started as a direct result of these tent revivals. And tell us a little bit about that. That was just a magnificent time. You see right now, even Sunday, I was in a tent revival as a result of what happened with COVID-19. But this was long before COVID-19 or anything like that. Dad was traveling with this large tent, and he would fill it up everywhere that he would set that tent up. It took a lot of work to get that and put that together, but the whole purpose of putting that tent up specifically was the purpose that Dad's ministry was birthed to begin with, and that is to bring in a harvest of souls and set the church on fire for God. God did a great work with these tent revivals, and tell us a little bit about that,
Well,
Dad.
it started with a little tent.
What year was that?
1959 and 1960 was when we launched it. In 1959, I had my first tent revival in Gentry, Arkansas, and it was on the school grounds right behind the Baptist church, and where John Osteen, Joel Osteen's dad, had preached there. And this was before Joel Osteen was even
thought
born.
of.
Yeah.
And John Osteen was a dear friend of yours through
Yes,
the
he
years
was.
as well.
John Osteen supported revival fires in a wonderful way, but we put up that tent that would hold 300 people, and I didn't realize how small of a tent that would be. I mean, the sign we had out front was bigger than the tent because I didn't realize it was going to be such a small tent. But we saw how the tent was overflowed, and people streaming the aisles, people coming to church from all different denominations. That was my heartbeat. Was not so we'd have walls and denominations, but so God's people would unite just like they would be in heaven. And we went from there to Denison, Iowa, and we put up the little tent there. And after doing that in 1959, I decided this has been so good, let's go with a big tent now. But I'd had to have a semi-truck, trailer, and a big team, and all the seating, and the instruments, and everything. And I said, Lord, what we're going to do? And the Lord said, I will provide. I will provide. And he did. And we opened up that first night in the capital city of Kentucky, which was Frankfort, Kentucky. And I tell you, the glory of the Lord came down, and we had so many people coming, and they were coming from all over. They were filling that tent, and lives were being changed. And we had our challenges, but I tell you, it was great. Moved from there to Memphis, Tennessee. And Memphis is a place where that was a real challenge. And we put up the tent, and we had the Oak Rig Boys, who were our singers in the opening night. And they probably will not like me to tell this, but they came for $125. I paid them. They had to come down from Memphis. And that wasn't very much money compared to what you get, 25, 30,000 now. But anyway, we had this big tent, and they came, and I had Lowell Mason, and we had the Good Twins, and we had the Blackwood Brothers. And I loved to use the singing groups because I found out that people would put up a little preaching and get to hear this good singing I had. And I felt like, well, when we get to heaven, they'll stop the preaching probably, but they won't stop the singing. And so went on from there to Clayton, Oklahoma, where I went to high school 2 years. And this may seem hard to believe, but in that little town of 650 population is where I had the biggest crowd.
Amazing.
And on the opening night, we had 3,500.
Wow.
In a tent that would hold 2,000, it was overflowed.
You remember how many people got saved in that crusade?
Oh, hundreds.
Yeah.
Hundreds.
You started a church from that one?
Started a church from there. And before I even had the opening night, I went to the deputy sheriff who lived there in town. And I said, Sherman Conley, I said, I'm starting a big tent revival here on Sunday night, and we might need some traffic control. He looked at me kind of funny, and he said, Mr. Todd, I've lived here 40 years. We've never had any traffic problem. We're not about to have one for your tent revival. And he stomped off. And I thought, well, we'll see. The opening Sunday night, the crowd started coming from every highway and pig trail, and they came from all over. They filled up the tent. They overflowed the tent. It was amazing. And it's the biggest crowd that the town ever had. And this deputy sheriff, he got there late, but he was out on the highway directing that traffic, and he was sweating like a stuck pig. And I pulled up everything and stayed there after that because my health broke. I was just pushing it too hard. And we became the best of friends. And he apologized to me many times. He said, Brother Todd, he said, I had no idea what you were up to. He said, I didn't dream that there would be a crowd like this, 2 or 3, 3,500 people. He said,
Amazing.
I can't believe it. We put up the big tent in a cow pasture.
Mm-hmm.
The man who was the Boy Scout master for me, he was the one that said, you can have my property. And it was big enough for the cars, and it was big enough for the tent. But anyway, Sherman Conley and I and his family, and even his brother and their family became next door neighbors to your grandpa and grandma. And so those tent revivals, I went on from there to Oklahoma City and there to Pampa, Texas. And then we just went across the nation. And I tell you, it was exciting.
Yes. You know, one thing, Dad, that I think is just absolutely powerful is that you had a lot of high-profile celebrities that would come and attend your tent revivals. Many times they would do it without even making any announcements that they were coming. They would slip in, and I know that at one point that there was an interaction with Elvis Presley and his people. Tell us a little bit about what happened with that and what you were faced with and the decision that you made with regard to that.
Well, that was a highlight because I was raised to have a lot of admiration for Elvis Presley, like a lot of folks did. I didn't like the songs that he sung. I like a lot of things, but I liked the fact that he was raised right.
Yeah, raised in an Assembly of God church.
Yeah, and so I thought, well, you know, he's got to have some good back there. So when we put up the big tent in Memphis, Tennessee, and all of these celebrities started coming, then
and the Oak Ridge Boys were your special guests for that.
Yes, and so Elvis's people started coming. His dishwashers, his bodyguards, his lawn people, they started coming. After 3 or 4 nights, one of them pulled me aside and they said, we've been telling Elvis about all your big revival here, and he's just been impressed. He's been set on fire, even though he hasn't been coming. He's been set on fire by what we've been telling him. And I thought, that's a good sign. If people are set on fire who don't even attend, that's a good sign. And then they said, he wants you to go to his hometown of Tupelo, Mississippi, put up your big tent there and have a citywide revival, and he will pay you $40,000. That was in 1960. Well, you know, $40,000 was a lot of money in 1960. Let me tell you, $40,000 is still a lot of money.
Yes.
And I said, well, I'll pray about it. Well, after I prayed about it, I thought, we've got to have more than money. Money will not bring revival. We've got to have the churches and the people. They've got to be hungry. They've got to desire the fire. And I decided this won't work. It's wonderful, and I'd love to take his $40,000, but I can't do that. But you know,
one thing I really appreciate, Dad, is that through the years, you have never put a price tag in over 70 years of preaching full time when you got ministers, and I'm not knocking them if they feel like this is what God has called them to do, but and you set a great example for me, and that is that with regard to Elvis Presley offering you that $40,000, that would have been an easy thing for you to say, hey, look, I'll go over there and preach these services and have $40,000 to put back into the ministry and to put into our personal pocket. But you never put a price on preaching the gospel, and I'm so thankful for that.
When you're called of the Lord, Tim, and I hope that ministers and evangelists listening will pick up on this. When you're called of the Lord pays you. The Lord takes care of you. And if he doesn't take care of you, you better find something else to do. But I never put a price tag. I've worked with preachers who said, well, I got to have $10,000 for that, or a singing group, I've got to have $3,000, $5,000 for that. And preachers that say, I've got to have $20,000 for I'll preach for you at the Grand Palace, because we rented the Grand Palace for 5 years. And I thought, we can't put a price tag. Let's go for the Lord.
Yes.
Let's go for God, and then let God provide the funds.
That's right.
And he did. I never left any town where I put up the big tent or rented the auditoriums, but whatever bill was paid.
Right.
But one of the places where the Lord had to come through was in Springdale, Arkansas, And a professor at the Arkansas University in Fayetteville, he started coming. I didn't know he was a professor, but he was, and his heart was touched. And one night he said, Brother Todd, when you get ready to close down your revival here, he said, if there's any bills not paid, he said, I'll pay them. I'll pay them. You know, at the end of that revival, I went to him and I said, well, I've got a few $100s that we haven't paid yet. Oh, he said, let me get my checkbook. He said, I consider this an honor. The professor at the Arkansas University picked up the tab, and every bill was paid.
Praise
every
God.
bill was paid, and every crusade. And I never asked for it. When I'd go and set up the big tent or rent an auditorium, I'd never say, now I've got to have X number of dollars to do this. No, I said, I'll help you raise the money. We'll set up our own treasurer. People will give to it. We'll take up offerings during the meetings. And when all of this is over, if there's not enough money to pay the bills, I'll pay the rest. Well, they couldn't very well turn that down, but that's what I felt God wanted me to do.
Amen.
Go for God. Don't put a price tag on your services, because if God isn't paying you, you don't have any business being there in the first place.
That's right. That's right.